Awesome. Thanks everyone for attending this talk. My name is Adarsh Fernando. I am a Senior Product Manager on Android Studio.
And I'm Chris Sinco, UX Design Lead on Android Studio.
And we're going to talk to you about how you can increase productivity with Gemini in Android Studio. I just want to take a moment to really thank the organizers for having us today. It's amazing to see how big this event has grown. I remember my first DroidKaigi back in 2017. It was much smaller. So I think it's a huge testament to the organizers for continuing to grow this event. So thanks for having us. OK, so we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. First, we want to really step back and share why we're investing in Gemini in Android Studio. What do we see the vision here for, and why do we think it's important as a part of our future roadmap for Android Studio? We want to obviously help you understand how you can easily get started with Gemini, and particularly how you have control and there's transparency around code context and what information you can and don't want to share with Gemini. So we know that's very important for developers, so we're going to spend a little time there. And then what we're going to do is actually use Gemini to add functionality to a real app. We did want to do live demos, but having to do an offline session, we have to resort to video recording, so I do apologize for that. But the video recordings are, unedited sessions, so we will be using Gemini to actually add some functionality to code. All the way to, and the idea is from start to finish, from conceptualizing a feature, understanding how to approach it, how you might implement it, all the way to actually getting it ready for production, and even after, where you're monitoring for issues and how Gemini can help every step of the way. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about what's coming next. So all the features that we're going to demo in the videos are available today in the latest Canary version of Android Studio. But at the very end, we'll talk about things that are going to come next and soon. So not quite available, but coming soon. So why are we investing in AI? First and foremost, we want to give developers time back to focus on creating better experiences for users. We think that's such a huge opportunity with AI. All the boilerplate things or all the time-consuming jobs that are uniquely positioned for AI to do, making sure that Gemini is a reliable, accurate, well-performing tool to kind of give you that time back so that you can focus on making what we think is most important is great, amazing experiences for your users. And so that's why we want to do it, because it helps the Android ecosystem, it helps developers, and it helps users. Speaking of helping users, high quality code, right? So by training these models on the best practices of Android, ensuring that you have a model that's trained on the best security practices, accessibility practices, performance practices. You have like a peer programmer that's kind of utilizing all this knowledge and kind of helping you optimize your code as you're writing it, and even further beyond. So, having high quality apps, I don't have to explain to you, is very important to building a strong user base and a strong Android ecosystem. And then finally, it does help build that pathway in helping developers stay ahead. So whenever we introduce new technologies, whether you're still trying to convert your app from views to compose, which we highly recommend, or trying to update your app to be more adaptable to larger screen sizes, Gemini can help with that, kind of help you experiment, try to understand these new technologies and implement it all in the same kind of session. And so we think it's a really great way for developers to kind of learn, adapt, and implement these new technologies. So those are kind of our goals, why we're investing there. But each feature, we want to make sure that we apply certain guidelines to make sure they kind of meet developers' expectations and not get in the way. And so one of our first guidelines is making sure that we're transparent and we provide lots of control for developers over what information gets shared with Gemini and how that is used. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those options that are available to you. And a lot of folks actually don't realize just how granular those controls are. So I think that'll be really useful. Accelerating productivity is a very core tenet, right? And so part of that is not forcing you to change your developer workflow is really meeting you where you are. And so a lot of these features you're going to see, they're baked into the things you're using every day. And almost invisibly, Gemini is there to kind of help you along the way as you're coding. So it's not expecting you to break your current workflow or take you out of that, but really just be that assistive technology that kind of accelerates what you're already doing and hopefully in a more optimized, faster way. And finally, really maximizing creativity. And so as you'll see with some of the features, the way we, Chris and team have kind of designed a lot of the UX is allowing this ability to kind of experiment, to try out new ideas, get feedback from this model, and really experiment, reiterate, go back and forth. And there's a lot of these kind of UX affordances that allow you to do that. And so that's part of the guidelines that we try to bake into each of these features. So let's talk about how you can get set up with Gemini right away. And it's very easy. So in Android Studio, you might have, if you're not signed in, you might see this icon at the top right corner. We invite you to click on it and then hit sign in. We're just talking to someone who's like not yet signed in yet, but maybe we can convince a lot of you to kind of try this out. So once you sign in, there's a number of different services. So we've kind of like unified and combined this flow so that in one flow you can sign and see all the different services that are available to you from Firebase using device streaming or Crashlytics. The Crashlytics part we'll talk about a little bit later, as well as Google Play, and then of course Gemini. So with your Google developer account, you sign in and you can authorize Android Studio to access these services via your account. Once you go through, went too fast. Okay, once you go through the onboarding flow, one of the important questions, there's certain ones that get consent and things to enable Gemini, but one of the important questions is how much code context do you want to share with Gemini? And so this is a high-level toggle. As you can see, there's 3 options here. One is, hey, I'm happy to share code context with Gemini because it improves the accuracy of the feedback, because it actually enables a lot of additional functionality when you share code context. So for all my projects, I'm happy to share Gemini access to code. Then there's the second option where you might have some projects that you're playing around with. You're still trying to figure out how Gemini works with you, and so you want to go project by project, enable that access. And then finally, right now, you're not comfortable sharing code context, and that's fine. Just understand that the quality of the responses might not be as great, and some features would not be available when you do not share code context. But there is another level of granularity. So let's imagine that you do share code context. Within a project, you actually have the ability to define something which is called the AI exclude file. And it's the same syntax or grammar as a git ignore file, where you can list different scopes of files that Gemini will not have access to as far as like reading, analyzing, and using for code context. In fact, if you exclude those scopes, and when you're in the IDE, in the editor, you'll actually see the Gemini features are disabled when you're in those specific files. So here we have a first example, like you have, like let's say a library or a directory, maybe it's very sensitive business logic, you can exclude that. You can exclude certain files that have sensitive information, like key stores or API keys, you can do that. And let's say company policy currently forbids anyone on the team sharing code context. You can actually check in an AI exclude file and exclude the entire scope of the project and check that into your VCS. We hope we can convince you not to do that, that there's a lot of benefits to kind of sharing in very specific ways, whatever works for your team, but sharing code context wherever it makes sense to get some of that extra functionality and feedback. With that, I'm going to turn it to Chris to start using Gemini to code.
Thanks, Adarsh. Yes, so we'll walk through using some of these features that we're talking about through a project. So I've written a sample app, composed Pokédexer, and Pokemon's appropriate for being in Japan. It's a sample app in Compose powered by, maybe some of you know about the Poke API, great service for getting all this data about Pokemon. But this app, at a basic level, is the Pokédex of the original 151 Pokemon. You can see their base stats, other things like evolution and moves. It's on GitHub also as well if you want to try it out. So the The thing we'll be working on, though, is building this filtering favorites feature. So currently on the left screen, there's a bunch of Pokemon that are listed. You can favorite them if you want, but there's no way to filter them. And so we're just going to walk through how to add a filter to that list. Yep, so if we start. So kind of where you start with Gemini is the tool window. And so this is really where kind of the first experiences with the chat. It provides an opportunity, to explore new problems and kind of have a conversation with Gemini and like bounce ideas off of it. You can kind of start with a very basic prompt. Like in this case, I said, add the ability to filter the list. It persists the context history. So as you converse with it, it remembers what you said last time and it actually has context of the project. There are some quick actions to quickly insert code or copy code to the clipboard. You can even open it in the Kotlin Scratch file if you want to just verify that it actually works. And if you do decide not to share code context, the chat does still work. But do note that everything you send, is sent to a model. And so what we try to do is if you do have code context set to off, when you try to copy paste code into there, we just warn you, hey, by the way, you do have code context off. Are you sure you want to do this? Just to make sure that people know that that's there. So let's switch to the video of how this will work. So in this case, let me move that. So like Adarsh said, we had to do this offline. So here you type in the prompt. And so I'm just going to say, add this ability to filter the list. It sends the prompt over. In this case, I want to actually add the filter to that top app bar. And so Gemini now is suggesting to use a filter chip. It's also using the code on the right, the Pokédex screen.kt, to actually figure out, okay, so you need to add this state. You need to add some actions to the medium top app bar. And then also change the lazy vertical grid, which is actually showing the Pokemon. So in this case, I'm going to just copy paste this one at a time. I think in a future world, we would make this really easy to just do a big merge. But for now, this is kind of at least my preferred way to do it, just because I can be exact about what I want to take from the model and what I don't want. And so we just kind of go through the composables, add some state here, and then add this little line. And then I will pass the filtered Pokemon to the item index function. So I'll go ahead and test it, just quickly with interactive preview. And it's actually not working. So, one thing is, these models still aren't perfect. I wish they were, but they're not. And so if you do copy code, always make sure it works. Don't just blindly trust it. In this case, I think it forgot to tell me to actually pass the Boolean to the Pokemon list, so the filtering wasn't working completely. So I'm like, oh, okay, I got to do that. And so put that in. Run interactive preview again. And yep, there we go. It's working. Oh, whoop. So go back here. So that's the chat. But I think, as I was just saying, it's a little inconvenient to kind of like copy paste all the time. And I think the other thing is, I think developers like to work in the editor more. And so one thing we've tried to kind of provide is not only you can use AI in the chat window, but actually directly on your code. And so we have a feature which we're calling custom code transformation. And so this allows you to actually prompt Gemini immediately on your code. So all you have to do is in the editor, select a piece of code. You can use the context menu, and there's a set of actions for Gemini. There's open transform, which is what we have here, but there's other convenient functions like explaining the code, commenting, documenting. There's also a handy keyboard shortcut. So if you're on Mac OS, it's Command \, and on Windows and Linux, it's Control \. And then so Gemini will respond with a diff instead of just a chat window. And so let's switch to the demo. And this will be this one. So here, we just...
It's not playing.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So here we did add the filter chip previously, but I actually don't really love this button. It's kind of a, I don't think people typically put a filter chip in a top app bar. So I would actually prefer an icon. So what I can do is directly in the code, select it, and then hit the keyboard shortcut. And then here I'm just going to tell Gemini, I would like to use an icon button. And you can kind of just talk to it in a very conversational way. So we'll send off the prompt to the model, and then it should return shortly with a diff. And let me just pause the video for a second. Yep, so here it opens, for all intents and purposes, the AI diff tab. So here you can actually review like what it returned. It's slightly different from other diff tabs you have seen in the IDE. So in this case, you can scroll through it. But the one thing that we have added, which kind of speaks to that guiding principle about like trying to allow people to be more expressive, is to actually have this refine button. So in this case, I don't love the fact that it is using two different icon buttons as a suggestion. So I'm like, can we do a little better here? Or maybe more simple. So I said, just use an icon button. So I can hit refine, sends the query again, and we'll come back. And so it will just stay in the diff tab and just reload it. And so this time it's showing an icon button, and it's a little better, but I'm still not super happy with it. And so now I'm going to ask it, can you actually not use two different icon styles? I'd just like to use one icon style. And so just use the default set. And we'll send that off. Yeah, so now this is better, but still not perfect. But for the demo, we'll just move on. But, so just freeze frame there. The one thing to note is you can actually go back and forth through the transformation history. So I think sometimes if you really liked the first result and maybe not the fourth result, you can go back and forth. And so in this case, I didn't love the last one, so I'm just going to go back to the second one. So I can look at it and say, this looks good. I'm ultimately going to use that, and I'll accept the changes. So accepting the changes will put the code right back in the editor. I didn't love the icon choices it made, so I'll just hand edit it myself. But it got me most of the way there just through prompting. And then now we have a nicer icon button. All right, so. And then the other thing that's available, which I think you'll probably use, or you'll just be using more often and you won't even see because it's just moving back and forth, is code completion. So there is code completion in the IDEs. We're familiar. There's a pop-up menu, but we have AI-based code completion, which has this ghost text as you type. And so by enabling code context, you're allowing Gemini to look at the file. And so wherever the cursor is, it will look at the surrounding context and then try to determine or predict what you're likely to type. And so it works in conjunction with the current AI, code completion, where you can just hit tab to accept. And so let's actually get a preview of what that looks like. So as you type, in this case, actually, it's so fleeting, but it's very subtle. It's like here, I'm typing the word type, and so it knows that there is a object called type, and then it quickly can just fill the whole thing and be like, oh, you're trying to pass the parameter type. But the idea is that it's really supposed to be there as you type and not totally get in your way. And in here, I'm just kind of using code completion to get to this drop down. Oh. Let me move this thing. It's in the way. Go away. Oh. Anyway. But yeah, with very little keystrokes, I was able to describe it to get a drop-down menu and then the drop-down items. And then it knew, oh, I didn't jump to that video. Apologies. And it quickly knew that I was trying to build out this filter menu. And so as I move the cursor there and then I just hit enter, it was like, oh, you want to use the type filter dropdown menu, so it immediately scaffolded it and knew what callbacks to give. And so, this kind of feature you'll probably use even more, and you may not even notice it. You're just going to like tab your way through all the code. It's actually a big time saver. And then the last feature we'll show is rethinking variables. And so this is a nice way to improve the readability of your code. And so Gemini will look at the whole file and then basically give you suggestions about how to rename your variables. The powerful part about this is because it has the whole context of the file, it can actually look at how you're using the variables, which actually, in this case, if we jump to the demo, let's see. So you can right-click in the file at any point and just say rethink variable names. And, oh wait. Can this go away? Maybe. Okay. Let me try that. Yep. And so this dialog will pop up with all the list of variable names in the file. You can review them, and in this case, it's showing that like it actually knew that I was generically naming variables just Pokemon, but it knew the context of that I'm trying to actually show all Pokemon or only the favorites. And so I think, that I'm horrible at naming things, and so I thought this was a very useful tool for me, and especially for other people who might look at this code base later and maybe be confused by my naming. That is one thing I did want to show as well is, so when you do the rethink variable names, it ties into the IntelliJ refactoring system. So it's a system you're familiar with. We're just adding a nice little layer of AI on top of this flow. In this case, I didn't want to actually change any strings or comments, just the symbols in the file. And then it will just refactor it as such. All right, and so with that, I think Adarsh will walk through some features about how to get you ready for production.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, so that was a lot of really cool features. I just want to kind of highlight that, you had the chatbot, which is going to be improved and augmented and have better responses with code context. But all the features that were right in the IDE, from code completion to the custom transforms, they do require code context. So just keep that in mind. Those features would require that. Okay, so we built this new feature out, and we want to get ready for production. Gemini can still help you along the way with even the final steps of shipping. So obviously, we're test-driven developers. We want to make sure that there's tests for our new features. We're still working on how to fully leverage Gemini to fully write implemented tests for your project, but that's a very challenging problem to do reliably and well, and having really good tests is important. So that's still a challenge we're working through. But available today is at least getting you up and running, writing tests a little bit faster. And so this is called generating unit test scenarios. And so what Gemini is able to do is analyze your code and determine what are the common cases, what are the edge cases, what are all the different scenarios that you ought to write unit tests for, and scaffolds it with a lot of detail, like detailed method names as well as detailed code comments. So you can kind of understand, what is the purpose of this test? How should I implement it to ensure that we cover as many bases as possible? So it's just a little helpful feature in kind of getting you through that phase. So go here. So right in the code, I pull up the context menu. So I want to actually write unit tests for this update favorite. So it's the action where you actually go and favorite a Pokemon. We didn't write tests, so we want to go in and write tests for that now. So using the Gemini context menu, you can see that unit test scenarios is what we want to generate. So when we click on that, actually taps in a lot into the existing generate test dialog that you're familiar with, IntelliJ. But now instead, once you click OK, we look at the methods in this file, and then we click which one we want to actually write unit tests for. So right now we're just going to focus on the update favorites. And when we click OK, yes, add it to our project. This is all pretty standard IntelliJ. But now it's actually sending the query to Gemini, saying, hey, here's the file, here's what the developer wants to write unit tests for. What are all the different scenarios that they should cover? And again, we say, yes, add the file. And then as you can see, it comes up with quite a few scenarios. I'll just pause it here because I'm scrolling a little fast. But you can see all these different edge cases for your code. And kind of scaffolds it with like, here's the to-do, you got to implement it, but here's what you might want to target, the behavior you want to test for each of your unit tests. So it just kind of helps you kind of get through that kind of brainstorming phase and just start getting into implementing. And like we mentioned, we are still working on kind of like the next step. Okay, we got the scenarios. Could we use Gemini to actually implement the test code in a way that actually compiles with your app and does what it's supposed to do? Very challenging problem, so we're still working on that, and that's coming up. Okay. I mentioned Crashlytics earlier. If you remember in the original sign-in flow, there's a number of services. One of those was Firebase, which if folks are using Crashlytics, it's a very powerful crash reporting system along with Android Vitals. So this is, your app is in production, users encounter crash, providing you rich, detailed reports of what happened in that crash so that you can fix it. There's a lot of data in there. There's error codes and the stack traces, and then there's the device model. There's a lot of different variables there, and it takes time to kind of understand what the root cause is, how you might approach it, and what are some fixes you might want to try. These are all things that Gemini, with its, as we're training it with more and more of these scenarios and how developers have fixed these issues, this is a great way to kind of leverage Gemini to kind of help out there. And so here you can see there's a tool window in Android Studio called App Quality Insights that allows you to view these crash reports directly in the IDE and also be able to see kind of like within the context of the project. And now we've added this Gemini action, which is to show insights. So let's take a look at how that works. Oh, next one. Thanks. Okay, so here we're in the AQI window. We can see this stack trace, and because it's within the project, we can just click right from the stack trace and go right directly to that file. That's a unique feature of App Quality Insights versus viewing this crash report in the console. And so, okay, we're at the file. Let's just see what Gemini has to say. So we're going to click Show Insights, and it opens up the chat window, which allows Gemini to provide some responses, but also allows you to have a more conversational approach to kind of dig into some of the details. So here we can see, okay, there's Gemini has identified there's a number of reasons. It's identified that it's like a 521 status code. So okay, there could be a number of reasons, like the server is out or there's connection issues, and even has some troubleshooting steps like, hey, you might want to check this server status. You might want to check the device has a connection. And it provides some code suggestions for you to try out and use, including like a try catch, actually checking using platform APIs to actually check if there's a connection, so on and so forth. And so like Chris demoed earlier, you can cut and paste. You can use the transform code to actually highlight the network check and say, hey, can you add a try catch here? Hey, can you check the server status before making a network request? So you can use those other Gemini features to actually implement and make those changes and include that in your workflow. Cool. Okay, so now we're coming to, we want to commit this, and probably one of the most, after you've kind of made a bunch of different code changes, you've written your tests, and now you got to think of a commit message, and we all know that having a really detailed commit message is difficult to do, but really helpful for anyone else who's going to look at your changes for a good, healthy Git history. And so here, with just a click of a button, Gemini is able to look at all the changes in this commit, say, okay, here are the different changes, have it in a human readable way, and so you don't have to spend time thinking about it. Just click a button and adds all those details. So it's just a small but very helpful feature in kind of maintaining good Git history health. Okay, and then I'm going to pass it to Chris, who's going to talk about some of the exciting things that are coming up next.
Thanks, Darsh. And also for, the commit message feature, it does take into consideration AI exclude. So if you were working on code that is sensitive, the commit message will not reflect because it will not look at those files. So coming up, there's a couple of features we're working on that I think will make this even better. I think one of the things many of us, I guess, who've used AI tools is, the more context it has, usually the richer the response can be. And so for us, our focus, or kind of a simple way, is like, if there's richer inputs, you're going to get richer outputs. And so we want to allow you to pass even more context to Gemini than we currently do. So, a couple things is we're giving you a lot of the control and flexibility for the context you provide. So whether you want to, pass it an entire module like your design system or some business logic, the entire project, specific files in the project, or maybe in a lot of cases with Android UI development, you might get a mock-up from your designer, and so you want to actually upload that file as context, send it to Gemini, and say, hey, my designer needs me to build a new screen or feature in our app. Can you just take this mock-up and actually, scaffold out how that could look, so I can actually, get a better starting point. And so I think, we do want to support non-text inputs as well, like screenshots and maybe in the future videos, who knows. And a lot of this is tapping into some of the Gemini model development that's already happening widely at Google. I think we're just a little behind in getting it integrated into Android Studio, but we're working as fast as we can. But the idea is, when you do send all this context, we want to make sure that it's clear to you what context we used to generate that response. So the mock-up on the left, you can see, you attached the screen that you did upload, but we also looked at some design system module. We looked at some of the open files that you had in the editor, and just so we're always transparent about, how things are working. The other thing too is, unfortunately, there's only one timeline in Gemini, in the Gemini chat. It's simple, but it doesn't quite scale to everyone's needs. And so we've heard the feedback loud and clear that we definitely need to support multiple conversations. And so we're actively working on this. Because, as you're working, it's natural for you to be working on one thing and maybe someone bugs you and says, hey, can you go look at this? And you have to switch contexts, and maybe you don't want to totally delete the conversation you're currently having with Gemini. And so we want to make it easier in the future to actually have multiple conversations, and you can switch between them, continue them. And so this is one of the concepts we're working on, but the idea is, the current conversation is on the bottom. In this case, you're talking with Gemini about how to do migration to compose from views. We'll do some smart things like, as you're having a conversation, we'll actually automatically title or name the conversation based on what you're talking about, and it can update as you keep asking questions. But then the idea is you can kind of scroll back up through history and see past conversations that you've had. And then the idea is you can click into each of them and kind of continue that one, so that you can have multiple conversations with Gemini and not lose one of them. And then the last thing is a prompt library. So, oftentimes, with teams and projects, you might find yourself repeating the same prompt or question to Gemini. And so this one, I think, is a simple one, I think, that we can provide, but allow you to create custom prompts for your project or your team. But the other thing is also being able to modify the preset prompts that we have in the product. So, if you're not in love with the prompts that we have for explain this code, you can go in and change it. And so we want to make this available also for folks. And how to invoke these prompts, you can, in this case, it'll be through the right-click menu, similar to the custom transform. But we want to make it available in chat as well. And with that, I'll let Adarsh.
Cool. So thanks, Chris. Yeah, we've talked about a lot of different things today, so we just want to kind of recap some of these things. So we kind of started out talking about how you can get started with Gemini on board, how you have, and we try to optimize for making sure that you have full control over code context. I think one important thing that we didn't mention is that Gemini in Android Studio is currently available at no cost. So there's no, we definitely encourage everyone to go try it because there's no cost right now to use it. So it's really as simple as going and signing in and saying that, hey, yeah, I want to try Gemini, figuring out what level of code context is right for you, and trying out all of these features for yourself. Then Chris kind of talked us through using the Gemini chat window, which is really kind of like the easiest kind of first, most intuitive way to kind of have a discussion with Gemini, explore different ideas, add just the code context that you want. If you not, don't want to share all your code context, it's just what you copy and paste into the chat window, you can get feedback on. And then we talked about how we are also bringing Gemini directly into the code editor. So one of the more powerful ways is using the custom transforms, where you can provide your prompt to actually go directly to a code change, whether it's document this code, add a new function, modify the behavior, whatever it is, and then having those really powerful tools to kind of refine. So providing more prompts to kind of continue to refine that idea, going back in history so that you can kind of really play around with it and find exactly the code changes you want. And then if you don't want to kind of go with the prompt, you can just let Gemini kind of code along with you with the code completion. So as you can see here, it's not just like simple lines of code, but really with the full code context, it's able to do full function method bodies and like multi-line changes. And so we're hoping that developers kind of really get used to just tabbing their way and adding large amounts of code with Gemini that way. We also talked about how it helps you when you're nearing production with really powerful tools to generate insights around crashes, things that sometimes really difficult and frustrating to kind of investigate and resolve, but are very important for your users. And so how can we use Gemini to accelerate that? Additionally, we talked about commit messages and generating unit tests as well. And finally, we talked about some of the things that are coming up. So definitely, when you try it out, keep your ears open for some of these features and some other features we haven't really talked about today that we really want to talk to you about, but are coming up. So definitely give it a try. Please give us feedback. We thank you all for coming here and participating. Chris and I will be around after this talk to answer any questions. So thank you all, and we look forward to chatting with you.
Thank you.